I'm a pacer, so I have to be careful about going too far from the monitor or the microphone. I was really jealous about Jose and Sean's presentations this morning with all that wonderful, beautiful, delicious data. Graphs about population changes and reproduction levels and fawn production just made me salivate, wishing I could have the same data to share with you. But as you'll see, it's kind of a different story with mountain lions. The goal here is not to share with you everything we know about mountain lions. That would take longer than the 15 minutes that I have. But I wanted to give you an overview of the things that we're thinking about, the challenges that we're facing, and then the data we're trying to generate to get a better handle on it. Like bighorn sheep and like pronghorn, Parks and Wildlife is statutorily required to manage non-game species, of which mountain lion is a non-game species. So we have to monitor them, and we have to make sure that we know what's going on with their populations. The challenge is that we don't have it's a lot harder to do that research on carnivores, especially solitary, secretive carnivores like mountain lions. So mountain lions are historically ranged over the entire part of North America, of the United States, and now they're relegated to the western part of the United States. We have them in the Trans-Pecos, we have them in South Texas, and then sort of inkling sightings and inkling errant individuals in the central part of the state. And so you'll see this is a map of all of the documented or confirmed mountain lion sightings. The Parks and Wildlife has amassed since 1982. So you can see by far, most of the mountain lions in Texas are right here in the Trans-Pecos, with a sizable, predictable population down in South Texas. A little bit about diet, and some of you in the audience did this research, so I'm not sharing anything that you don't already know. But one study done right here in the Davis Mountains, looking at more than 200 kill sites, showed a pretty diverse set of prey items. So about a quarter of the prey items were mule deer, and then another 14% were white-tailed deer. So deer and elk were by far the largest proportion of the diet. Now, if you look at by biomass, elk actually rose above. And so by biomass, elk was a more important part of the diet than the deer, but regardless, that is the biggest part. They also took javelina, feral hogs, and then aoudad, coyote, porcupines, lagomorphs, and rodents. Now, the interesting thing is the different lion age classes tended to show preference for different prey. So the younger lions tended to prefer smaller prey. And interestingly, the older lions also tended to prefer smaller prey, less than 50 pounds. And so that study also showed that females and males had different diets. And so it may even come down to, this lion figured out a good way to get javelinas, and so they just selected for javelina. Or this lion figured out a good hunting strategy for elk, so they focused on that. And so it's pretty varied, but Trans-Pecos wide, Davis Mountains, this is what we came up with. In South Texas, it's very similar. More dependence on feral hogs and javelina, and white-tailed deer become slightly less important down there because of the abundance of javelina and feral hogs. So I wanted to give you a little bit of our current understanding of mountain lions. First, the graph on the left shows harvest rates for the 5 studies that we have, and that's kind of what I started the presentation with pronghorn and mule deer and bighorn and whitetail. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of studies, sometimes a dozen studies within a single 2-year period. The challenge is we just don't have that body of literature because it's so hard to study them. It's so expensive. And even the projects that we have been able to fund have small sample sizes. So looking at the graph on the left, looking at harvest rates, you can see that by the shading of the graph, when harvest rates get above 15%, then we start to get into some danger territory, some population level concerns. And the 5 studies, one at Big Bend Ranch State Park, Carlsbad and Guadalupe National Park, Big Bend National Park, South Texas back in the 90s, and the Davis Mountains study shows that harvest rates were much higher than those comfortable thresholds, okay? If we look at adult female survival on the right, once it gets to be below 80%, that starts to be some flags. I don't want to say red flag, I don't want to say orange flag, but some concern, right? And so the lower that survival is, the more concerned we are that that population is not self-sustainable. As you can see, the 5 studies that I've highlighted here are all below that 0.8 threshold. So there's cause for concern, and thus the reason why we've been looking into monitoring populations and trying to get more data to flesh out how the lion population is doing in Texas. Now, I showed in the map that we have lions in the Trans-Pecos and lions in South Texas. So we really have all the genetic work and all the population level work shows that we pretty much have 2 distinct populations. I'm not saying they don't interact with each other, but we can consider them separate and may need to deal with them separately. The other problem is some of these studies that I'm showing are 20, 30 years old. And so it's hard for us to say this is what the lion population looks like now in South Texas based on the study in the early 90s, right? And it's hard to say that the Davis Mountains study or the Big Bend National Park or the Big Bend Ranch study that we did in the 90s or in the early aughts, it's hard to say that those still stand because so much changes, right? Prey availability, level of hunting and harvest, public perceptions and attitudes, and just habitat quality and connectivity, and also changes in trapping strategy. So a lot changes over the course of the 35 years for which we have data. So it's really difficult for us to say, this is what the lion population looks like now. So as part of this effort to get more data, to understand these critters better in Texas, we have participating in a couple research projects. One is being done by Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute down in South Texas. And the goal there is to find out population demographics, survival, reproduction, but also movement ecology as it relates to the border wall. And similarly, we've also funded a Valverde County study to try to figure out that middle ground between Trans-Pecos and South Texas. What are the population demographics down there, right? So in that middle ground where we don't really have any studies, what does reproduction look like? What does survival look like? How many lions are surviving to adulthood? What are the causes of mortality, right? So the field work is beginning soon for that Valverde County study, but just as an example, that's a 5-year project that we're funding, and it costs $750,000. So it's very expensive. And I would be shocked if that study gets any more than 10 or 20 lions. So sample sizes are low. It takes 5 years. We can't bang this out in a 2-year master study. It's just challenging. We've also done quite a bit of work with stakeholders. And so in the early 90s, this bubbled up and got a lot of attention. And people said, what are we going to do about mountain lions? What do we know? Well, not much. Well, what do we think is going on in the population? Well, I think this. Well, I think this. So they had a roundtable. And the result of that roundtable was a couple of research projects that I've already quoted, the Big Bend National Park study, Big Bend Ranch State Park, and then the South Texas study. In 2023, started bubbling up again. People started saying, what do we know about mountain lions? Is the regulatory framework for mountain lions, does it match what the population are needed? Well, I don't know, right? So we started this stakeholder engagement, and it was a group of 19 people, of producers and biologists and landowners and land managers and researchers and nonprofit organizations and landowner, property owner type of organizations all got together to talk about, to answer a couple of questions. So we spent a whole year trying to get engagement and constituent feedback on how to solve some of these challenges. That resulted in a commission action, the Parks and Wildlife Commission, taking action on a couple of key issues. That was on canned hunting and trap check requirements, and I'll get to that in a second. We still don't have answers about how the mountain lion populations are doing and whether they're sustainable and whether the regulatory framework matches. And so we started an effort to develop a research and monitoring plan. And that plan was signed at the end of December 2025. And then we're keep going. So in 2026, we had more public comment on harvest reporting. So I say that to share that we really focus on listening to people, listening to what they think is going on, and how to get at some of these answers. So I shared all this stuff already. I did not mention the voluntary harvest reporting. We have an app now that will, you can report harvest of white-tailed deer or turkeys. Some of those are required reporting. You can also now report mountain lions in that app. So that was a big milestone. And in 2024, the commission did take action to prohibit canned hunting and to require a 36-hour trap check standard. So as I mentioned, we have the population concerns about survival and mortality. In South Texas, one of the studies that we funded about 15 years ago showed that there were genetic problems in South Texas. And so we have all these concerns floating around. And we have no ability to really collect these data other than these very expensive research projects. One of the things that we've been exploring is the idea of collecting harvest data to, instead of spending $750,000 on a 5-year project, maybe we can collect these data on a regular basis to get at some of these population demographic. The other challenge that we have is actual landowner opinion. So I've talked to West Texas and South Texas landowners, and I've said, what do you think about lions? What do you think about lion harvest? And they said, well, I'm fine with lions being on the place, and I would not allow lion harvest on my place. But my neighbor, boy, they don't like that. They don't like lions. Well, I've gone and talked to those neighbors, and what they say is, well, I like lions, but my neighbor don't like them. So we're dealing with the perception of other people's perceptions, which are sometimes influenced by parents and grandparents in different eras. So it's really hard to get at how people feel when individuals might feel differently than what they perceive to be the group dynamic, right? So we have a lot of factors in the algorithm here. So when we can talk about bighorn sheep and pronghorn, that makes me feel really cozy and warm and fuzzy and happy, right? I can't answer a lot of questions. So how many lions in Texas? I don't know. Well, how many lions are harvested in Texas? I don't know. Is that harvest sustainable? I don't know. How about the lions that we have? Is it at least, are the Trans-Pecos lions self-sustaining, or are we relying on incoming lions from Mexico and New Mexico? I don't know. So it becomes really difficult for us to manage the species or to be reasonably sure that we're doing it well if we don't have all these data points. So we did this research and monitoring plan, and what it does is an internal Parks and Wildlife document to guide how we build a population model, to outline the data deficiencies I've talked about. It lists research priorities, and it commits to building those population goals up, down the same, based on constituent feedback, right? We don't want to do this just based on data, just based on some biological opinion, or just based on how some Western state like Oregon or Washington or Colorado manages their lions. We want to do it in concert with producers and landowners. More than anything, what we're looking for is to keep the regulatory flexibility, Right now, Texas has the most liberal mountain lion harvest regulations of any Western states. And I'd like to make sure that we can still do that if the population warrants it. The trouble is that some of the data we have show that maybe that's mismatched. And so we're just trying to develop the data to make sure that our system in Texas can keep working. But in this research and monitoring plan, we have committed to working with landowners and producers, and also to make sure that producers and landowners have that flexibility to manage depredating lions. So we have some red lines, and we want to make sure that that flexibility is maintained regardless of what the data show. But there's some larger conversations about how to handle lions statewide that we don't know. So we have a lack of data. We have very little ability to monitor lion populations outside of these expensive research projects. We don't have that annual trend data that's so important to other species. And we know that flexible regulations require good, usable data so that we can make sure that the regulations are built on data and not just what people think is happening out on the landscape. And I don't think I have time for questions, but I appreciate y'all entertaining me today.
Do have time for one question? I got time for one question.
Need to figure out whether you want mule deer and pronghorn or whether you want mountain lions.
Well, that's the value that I was talking about, right? So we want to make sure that we incorporate all that complex attitudes and perceptions. That's why we've committed in our research and monitoring plan to start measuring and talking to folks to say, what is your value system here, right? And do you want lines to be increased, to decrease, or to stay the same? So that way, when we find out what those populations are, then we can match them with the cultural carrying capacity goals that are set by the people in the local community.
Thank you.